Hi, my name is Jocelyn Hughes, and I am here to discuss my research paper that I wrote. The topic that I chose to write about is issues confronting law enforcement with regards to organized crime. Okay, so basically, the first thing I want to discuss is one issue that I think a lot of people fail to realize, or they don't understand, or they can't see how it is an issue, is how Hollywood and literature has romanticized organized crime. Now, I know that there was a lot of uproar back when American Gangster came out because people thought that, it was painting Frank Lucas to be, a hero, and it was, oh my God, is it going to make kids want to be involved in organized crime? Although that wasn't the case. It is still a genuine concern. It's something that, we should take into consideration when we are making movies and when we are, Scarface, best movie ever. I mean, there's something that is endearing and inspiring about someone who builds an empire from the ground up. They come from nothing and they rule with an iron fist, but they have a soft spot somehow. That's one thing, that's one pattern and one trend that I've always noticed in movies in Hollywood, and I mean in real life as well, because you see people like Pablo Escobar and other crime bosses who have obtained a Robin Hood image, where a lot of people don't really care that they commit these atrocious acts. They don't care that you're a drug dealer. They don't care that you kill people because you take care of them. And that is a legitimate concern, because if you think about it, how can police investigate organized crime? How can they respond to reports of organized crime when people aren't reporting it? So that's one issue that we have to take into consideration. Okay, so basically, another thing that I wanted to discuss is the ambiguity of what the definition of organized crime is. One trend that I noticed in my research is that with a lot of the federal agencies, and I'll talk about them in a minute, but with a lot of them, they use very vague definitions and vague terminology when it comes to defining what organized crime is. They hardly ever list out, activities like this is specifically, a sign that someone is participating in organized crime. They don't say, oh, if this person's gambling illegally, or if this person is, trafficking, smuggling, stuff like that. They never list that. And it's kind of frustrating, because if you're a normal citizen, how can you know what to report as organized crime when you don't know what it is? So that's one issue that is facing law enforcement, is because people just don't know what organized crime is. And that's unfortunate, because one, it sucks when people don't want to report it because they love their, the people that do organized crime. And it also is really unfortunate when people don't want to report it because they don't know what it is. And you don't want to send the police out there to investigate something and, it's like, oh, I'm not sure if it's a crime or not, but if you could check it out. I mean, the police, granted they're supposed to go investigate it, but ultimately you don't want to lead them into a fruitless investigation. That's the bottom line. So let's talk about federal agencies. I briefly mentioned them a minute ago or whatever, but unfortunately there's been a large shift since 9/11, where our federal agencies are focusing primarily on counterintelligence and terrorism. And unfortunately, a lot of traditional crimes, and organized crime is included in that tier of traditional crimes, they've kind of fallen by the wayside. I mean, there's so much evidence that suggests that there are less convictions, less prison sentences for members in organized crime groups. And you have to wonder why that is. Is it because of the shift in focus? Is it because, it's just so hard to infiltrate and penetrate these organized crime groups? And most of the research that I discovered basically was the first one, where it was just the shift in focus. They don't really consider organized crime a threat to national security, when in reality it really is a threat. And what it boils down to is that, most of that burden is now on, it now falls on state and local police departments. So state and local police departments, I mean, let's just compare the sheer numbers. So there are 73 federal agencies that have federal arrest authority, and that's approximately 120,000 employees that work within those agencies and stuff like that. But when it comes down to it, on the state and local level, there's approximately, I believe, the number is a lot higher. There's a lot more people, obviously, in local and state police departments, which is to be expected because, well, the standards are a little lower and it doesn't take as much. I'm not trying to, discount what, local police officers do or anything like that, but that's what the bottom line is. A lot less is required of local and state officers than federal agents. Now, if you think about the sheer size of, the federal agencies and the equipment that they have, the resources that they have, it's a little unfair for most of the investigation of organized crime to fall on state and local departments. In fact, I believe there are roughly around 13,000 state and local police departments in the United States, and their budgets totaled like $55 million. Whereas, I'm not sure if any of you guys keep up with politics or the news or anything like that. James Comey, the director of the FBI, requested, I believe it was $9.5 billion for their budget for the FBI. So that's a big issue facing law enforcement, is that it's kind of hard to investigate organized crime when you don't have the means to do so. So you have to wonder, well, if federal agencies, if they have the means and the resources, the technology, the education to pursue organized crime and investigate it, why aren't they doing it? The answer is they don't really know, and they don't really give an answer to that. So what I found in my research is that organized crime is not a priority anymore. In fact, if you think about it, the director of the FBI, when organized crime was at its peak, J. Edgar Hoover, he even said that sure, once, the public became concerned, and once the public, they expressed their fears, oh my gosh, these guys are tearing up our streets, then J. Edgar Hoover was like, you know what, maybe it is a concern. And that's when, that first legislation started being proposed and enacted. But ultimately, J. Edgar Hoover came on record. I mean, I found so many articles where he said, organized crime, it's not really a priority. Basically what he wanted to enforce during his reign as director of the FBI was anti-communism and anti-radicalism. He did not really care about organized crime. It was not a priority. And so, unfortunately, it's kind of the same thing today, where the FBI and federal agencies are primarily focused on anti-communism and anti-radicalism, and they aren't really concerned about organized crime, which is kind of an international issue. So I had a couple of questions that I wrote because basically I figured, I had questions about my paper. I'm sure you guys will have questions about your paper. But one of the questions I wrote was, is there a link between organized crime and terrorism? And the answer to that is absolutely. There is overwhelming empirical evidence that shows that organized crime groups fund terrorist groups. And you would think that if the FBI knew this, and if the FBI is so concerned about terrorism, counterterrorism, and just stopping all means, keeping our country safe, then why haven't they made organized crime a priority if they are funding the people that we are trying to, neutralize? Why is that? I mean, there's so much evidence out there. I mean, I believe it's said that organized crime groups make up 1% of the world's GDP. Like, that's insane. That is absolutely insane that some organized crime groups have more wealth than some countries. Like, what? But anyway, so another question that I asked was, who is responsible for investigating organized crime? And what I found was that it primarily falls on local and state police departments, which is truly unfortunate because they lack the resources. And unfortunately, policing organized crime has become reactive. It's kind of hard to be proactive because organized crime has evolved since its first appearance in the United States. No longer are we seeing, gangbangers on the street. I mean, you still have your gangbangers and stuff, but organized crime is now a multi-billion-dollar industry. They've moved into different avenues of things. It's not just murder for hire anymore. It's now their money laundering. They have infiltrated, millions of dollars. I mean, they have infiltrated these companies, companies on Wall Street. I mean, we all heard about Bernie Madoff. I mean, that's a pretty good example of organized crime. Basically having an image of being a legitimate business. And that's what law enforcement isn't prepared for. Unfortunately, they can't, it's almost like they can't see that since organized crime has evolved and since people don't look the way they did, 60, 70, 80 years ago, it's like they don't know who to arrest. They don't know, like, oh, is that guy in an organized crime group or is that guy in an organized crime group? So that's one of the issues confronting law enforcement, is that organized crime has evolved with the time. With technology, with globalization, organized crime has flourished. And unfortunately, law enforcement is still using the same tactics to investigate organized crime that they used in the 60s, and it's not effective anymore. Legislation is not adequate anymore. In fact, I believe I learned that in the 50 states, only 33 states actually have laws similar to the RICO Act, which is basically the granddaddy of laws that talks, that basically prosecutes and that says, organized crime is illegal. Only 33 states have laws enacted like that, which is completely insane, because what happens if you're in one of those states where you don't have any legislation enacted to prosecute organized crime? Do you just give them a lesser charge and let them go? So that's another issue that's confronting law enforcement, is that there aren't very many friendly laws. There's not law enforcement friendly laws out there. It seems like law enforcement has failed to evolve with organized crime, and there is just a significant difference. It's almost like organized crime groups are 50 steps ahead and law enforcement is, 2,000 steps behind. It's an uphill battle that law enforcement seems to be losing because they won't take the time and the energy and the effort to actually investigate and actually get down to business and figure out why organized crime is such a threat. So basically, my last question, I kind of talked about it I guess I kind of mentioned it in my last answer, but my last question was, why can't local and state police departments handle organized crime? And like I mentioned, they lack the resources. I think it said, the research I saw, 1 in 4 local or state police departments require, an associate's degree. And I'm not saying that, because if you have a college degree, you're more educated. I mean, yeah, but ultimately it's just, it's harder for them because most of the times, a lot of local law enforcement agencies, they have older police officers who aren't used to using, the technology, who maybe lack some of the knowledge to handle organized crime, maybe lack some of the knowledge to, obtain information. So in addition to, the lack of resources, there's also, they don't have a large budget at their expense. There's no way that local police departments are going to get a budget of $9.5 billion. So they have to work with what they have. And although there are specialized units in police departments that do focus on crimes that are under the umbrella of organized crime, such as, prostitution, gambling, that's about it. And it's pretty much very reactive in that sense. They get a report and they go investigate. It's really hard for them to actually go into it. So basically, yes, that's what my paper is about. It's basically just talking about the issues confronting law enforcement, why, if there's a direct link between terrorism and organized crime, why is it the FBI? You know, why don't they care about that? And so the bottom line, what it boils down to is that the big issues that are confronting law enforcement with regards to organized crime is that they don't care enough about it, and it's not a priority anymore like it was 60 years ago. So how about we make that a priority again? All right, thank you guys so much.